can be brutal. You can be, 7 days into 3 consecutive storms where you literally haven't slept more than like 10 minutes at a time because you physically can't, because you get thrown around and you're pulling G forces off of every wave. You can't stand up because you'll just get thrown off your feet and you're physically drained. That's a pretty extreme, it's a pretty humbling place to be. But then a few days later, you could be in, flat water with some nice wind, sunrises, just, cruising along across the ocean in this like peaceful tranquility. The first thing I did was, I Googled, can you race around the world with diabetes? And the Google answer was, no, you can't.
Today's guest is someone who has taken on one of the toughest sports in the world, solo ocean racing. Jack Trigger is a British professional ocean racer, a championship winner, and a record breaker. He's also living with type 1 diabetes and is on a mission to become the first person with type 1 to complete the legendary Vendée Globe ocean race. Now, I'm not afraid of a challenge myself, but a solo, non-stop, unassisted sailing race around the world is really at another level. In this conversation, we'll talk about his journey into sailing, his experience living with type 1 at sea, and I'm also really curious to find out about the mindset it takes to face the toughest oceans on Earth and what he hopes his story means for the diabetes community. So Jack, welcome and thanks for being here.
Thanks very much. Hey, that was a great intro. You're good. Yeah, look,
I do my best.
I think I'll start off with a very quick, summary of what you just said. It's all the same. It's all the same. The big challenges, the small challenges, it's all the same. And we can get into that. But I guess that's my feeling.
You started sailing at a really, really young age, even though you didn't come from a sailing family. So maybe to get started, can you take us back to that first moment on the water? Like, what was it that hooked you?
Yeah, I'm so lucky. I mean, I found something I was passionate about at such a young age. I was 6 when I started sailing. I don't come from a sailing family, which is often you come from a sailing family, you're introduced to it by your parents. My mum, well, my dad. I lost my dad when I was 6, the same year, but both very adventurous. Always good at. I have a twin brother who's always good at pushing us into adventures and taking us to do things. So my mum took us to a local sailing club in Bedfordshire in the UK where we grew up, which is about as far from the sea as you can get. We're just on a small lake, and I think the sport is amazing for kids. What else can you do where you're 6 years old, where you get put in a boat, you get pushed away from the shore, and you have to do everything. You're responsible for the boat. You go sailing with someone else. You have to learn teamwork. You have to learn, the physics of what makes the boat go fast. You have to learn to embrace your fear of things like capsizing of the water. And you're 6 years old. So I loved the adventure of it. I loved the responsibility I was given. And then I started racing quite soon after that. And I just loved trying to make things go fast. So I was hooked.
Yeah, so you said soon after that, so from that first sailing experience to racing in some of the toughest ocean events in the world, you say fast, but that's a huge journey. So what were the key steps along the way in that journey?
I guess, I started sailing at 6, but I probably started racing, maybe within a year. And we do these camps, sailing camps at this same club. And they were always great because you do the camp and you'd be learning to sail and you'd be following these programs, and there was a lot of freedom, a lot of flexibility. A lot of it was just about going out and having fun as kids on the water. And they'd always do things like, like fun races at the end of the camp or something, and you try and get around the course as fast as possible. And that was always the bit for me that I most look forward to, and that probably over the top. I was probably that kid that was like taking it too seriously, trying to win the race. It was just meant to be fun. So yeah, and I love doing that. So I kind of then slotted from that into more racing style programs, learn to race properly. We have great programs in the UK. Actually, as a family, we moved to France for a few years, but then came back to the UK. So came back to those programs that we have because we're quite strong with dinghy racing in the Olympics. there's funding and there's lots of programs for taking, young junior athletes up through the youth level, up to Olympic level. So I kind of got involved in that and really learned to race properly and went through all those programs as a teenager. And I just loved it. I was so into it. And that then became, I guess through, following and being involved then in the sailing world and following I remember the first kind of big ocean races that I really had exposure to. Just following them online and seeing these teams race around the world, race across oceans, and it's very different to what I was doing racing dinghies, but kind of relatable in the sense that the boats were much bigger, but the same concepts. And then the fact that they got to cross oceans, that they put themselves through these immense challenges, pummeled by waves day after day. And then also, for me, a big thing was I could see them racing these yachts that were just the cutting edge of technology. And I love that. That's a massive thing for me. I love the technology. I love the idea of pushing those boundaries. So I was hooked into that. And then, yeah, I was very lucky. I stumbled into some cool opportunities when I was a teenager, went off to university, started racing on the bigger boats, started doing some offshore racing, some ocean racing, and then got asked to join a team. And that was that. That was kind of the start of my career, I guess. And we've just
Wow.
kept rolling with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible journey. You described it in a very short time, but it's not an easy thing to do. And you were competitive from a very young age. So are you a competitive person? Would you say that?
Yeah. I have a twin brother, so I think it's bred. When you have a sibling, a close sibling or something like, yes, we're very competitive. I've always been competitive. I like winning. I'm okay with losing, but I really like winning.
So for people who may not know maybe much about ocean racing, can you maybe describe what it's like to be alone in the middle of the ocean for days at a time?
Gosh, it's hard to explain.
Does it take a special type of person to do this?
100%. Of course it does. It's a very unique environment. It's a very unique position, I think, to put yourself in. And actually to try and understand the motivations of why someone might do that, I understand can be quite difficult. I think there are lots of people out there who like the idea of it and who might like, they might think they like it, but the guys that and girls that, do it to a high level and do it a lot, you have to enjoy it because it's so hard. So you have to, like, at a fundamental level, really enjoy something about it. And that doesn't mean you enjoy every minute of it. It's like, yeah, it's like any endurance challenge. You have people that, like yourself, that go in, and this is what I meant at the start by it's all the same. The challenges might seem bigger, but they're just different. They might be longer, they might be more extreme, but they're just different. So I suppose you've got to be someone that wants to go and challenge themselves. For whatever reasons, they could be personal reasons. They could be just because, they want to learn about themselves. It could be because they're trying to prove a point. They could be because they love something in the detail of the challenge. For me, I'd say it's all of those things. Certainly since being diagnosed with type 1, I'm trying to prove a point. I, from a young age, have loved the idea of, challenging myself physically, mentally, emotionally, see what I can learn about myself to try and, improve myself. And I think when you push yourself to the extremes, you find that in a way that you otherwise won't. Not to say that you can't learn about yourself in other ways. And some of the things you learn about when you're pushing yourself to the extreme aren't always applicable or relevant or useful. Often they are, but not always. And then I also, I love the detail because I love the whole process with, like I said earlier, with the technology around the boats. I love the technical challenge, I guess the scientific challenge of trying to balance, wind and waves and all of the different impacts, things that impact the boat to try and optimize them and make it go as fast as possible. Like, my brain just really likes that challenge. So it's a bit of everything, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I find ocean racing fascinating, but I would never, ever in my life think about doing that, actually doing that. It takes a special type of person. I think what you've described, all these things, they have to combine in one person to to prepare you for that. And probably, as I said, it's in the middle of the ocean days at the time. So you probably don't mind being alone, right?
No, I don't. I appreciate. I probably didn't answer your question there. What's it actually like? It's so varied. It can be brutal. You can be, 7 days into three consecutive storms where you literally haven't slept more than like 10 minutes at a time because you physically can't because you get thrown around and you're pulling G forces off of every wave. You can't stand up because you just get thrown off your feet. You haven't been able to eat properly in that time. You're just snacking because the motion of the boat's too violent. You can't cook hot food. And if you manage to take on food, you're trying to keep it down. Everyone gets seasick. Just people have different thresholds. And you're physically drained. That's a pretty extreme. It's a pretty humbling place to be. But then a few days later, you could be in, flat water with some nice wind, sunrises, just, cruising along across the ocean in this like peaceful tranquility of, I guess also, it's focus. It's like meditative. I wouldn't describe being in a big storm, getting thrown off waves, meditative. But then you have those moments where you kind of find a peace in like, this is my challenge. This is my task. And this is all I have to worry about. I don't have to worry about the world. I'm just out here in the middle of the ocean.
You're on a mission.
Yeah, exactly. It's very changeable. And I love that about that. The challenge constantly changes. It never relents, but it constantly changes.
What you've just told me about ocean racing is just, yeah, seriously impressive. But of course, on top of that, you live with type 1 diabetes. So yeah, that's another challenge you have. Maybe let's focus on that for a bit and go back to the start of that. So when were you diagnosed with type 1 diabetes?
I was 21 years old. Yeah, it's 10 years ago now, which feels like it's flown by. I think I always say this, I feel like I was very lucky to be diagnosed at a time when I kind of started to have a good idea of who I am. Clearly I've changed in 10 years, but I knew what I wanted to do. I was already doing it in a lot of ways with regards to the sailing, and obviously it's something that then kind of defines who you are. And so when I was diagnosed, it obviously was a massive change and a massive thing, but I was just so like resolved in this is what I'm doing. This is who I am. I'm not going to let it change me or impact. Obviously, there are like practical, functional things. And I was saying this to my girlfriend the other day. I'm not very good at plan Bs. I'm very much a plan A and only plan A person, but I'm very happy to adapt a plan. That's important for me. Plans don't work out. We know that as sports people. We know that especially in endurance sport, especially in endurance sport that relies on technology. So I'm very happy to adapt a plan. So yeah, it was obviously a big thing that happened to me, but I do feel like I'm very fortunate in that I was in a position where I wasn't going to let it take something away from me.
Because it was during an event that you actually started feeling that you have type 1 diabetes.
I was racing in off Oman. It was like a 3 week long race, but in stages. The stages were a few days long with a team. And typical, was very thirsty. I was like, it's 40 degrees in the day, kind of makes sense that I'm thirsty. Was passing lots of fluid, was going to the toilet a lot, which is kind of tricky on the boat. We don't have toilets on the boat, so everyone kind of notices as well. Lost a lot of weight. I didn't realize I'd lost the weight at the time. I remember a couple of things. I remember feeling very fatigued, like very tired, which obviously in the environment, I was like, oh, I know I'm meant to be feeling tired here. Like it's a difficult environment, but I do feel extra tired. And then I remember one thing in particular with hindsight, that I didn't realize at the time. I remember like leaning off the front of the boat. And don't worry, if you're not a sailor, you you won't know this is a thing, but I remember leaning off the front of the boat and there's some some ropes that hang off the front of the boat. Trying to organize them to do a sail change. I remember kind of like reaching out for one of them and seeing two of them having like double vision, like blurry vision. And I kind of like, passed that off. I didn't know what that meant, but I know now that's because like my the glucose was so high and I was going into DKA, and I obviously then my vision went blurry. I didn't know that at the time.
But you can laugh about that DKA, but that is a serious condition. So it was a dangerous situation. In hindsight, you probably only realized because at that time you kind of confused it with the feeling that you would normally get in such an event.
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges with type 1 diagnosis is, and I think that's why it's one of the reasons it's so important to educate people on, the symptoms, because the onset can feel quite gradual as you stop producing insulin and you still have, insulin available in some cells. And, I remember for me, I could probably look back a few weeks beforehand and say, well, actually, these things have started, then, I'm sure it's different in everyone, but it can feel quite gradual. And it's like the frog in boiling water thing, isn't it? When these things happen, gradually, you don't always recognize them as a serious problem. So for me, then compounded with the fact that I was in this environment where I was pushing myself to physical extremes anyway, the signpost for me that made me realize was when I flew home. So after the 3-week race, I flew home and then I weighed myself and I'd lost like 20 kilos of weight, which was
Wow.
probably 80 kilos. And I then came out 60 and I didn't have, a huge amount of weight to lose in the first place. And so I was like, well, maybe this is normal.
My God. Yeah.
Yeah.
That must have been, yeah, quite a realization.
Yeah. And I hear lots of stories about people with T1 or people who know, friends and family of people with T1 who have then diagnosed other people because the symptoms are so recognizable if you know what you're looking for. So for me, that's so important to try and educate and spread awareness about that.
So after that diagnosis, you never thought that you'd have to dial back a little bit or maybe even give up on your goals?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. It's not that I didn't, I'm a practical person. I didn't know. The first thing I did was I Googled, can you race around the world with diabetes? And the Google answer was no, you can't.
Google said no.
uh, yeah, and there'd been some rulings that had been made for a big ocean race where some people had tried to compete with diabetes and they said no. And so I took that as, oh, well, I can't, they're not going to let me do this. But there wasn't oh, you got to give up at this point. It was, well, maybe that will be the case, but maybe there's a pivot in there. Maybe there's something, but we're not there yet. The first thing I then had to do was learn how to live with the condition and then learn if I could go sailing at all. I had to, in a lot of ways, I had to learn for myself if I could do those things before I went out to prove to other people that I could do those things. So yeah, there was a huge amount of, I wouldn't call it doubt. You could call it doubt, I think, doubt about what I could go and do. But for me, it wasn't doubt. It was just questions. Can I do this? Will other people let me do this? I don't know the answer to those things. I have some information, but I need to just go and find out for myself and go through the process. I don't remember having any big, again, feel very lucky. I don't remember having any big, like, negative moments about it. But again, I think that speaks for the sporting mindset too. You have to get very good at losing. You get very good at moving on from failures and looking for the next success, looking for the next improvement. So that definitely served me well there.
You talked about what I would say is an institutional barrier. So they basically had rules that would not allow you as a person with type 1 diabetes to compete. So how did you get around that? How did you get in anyway?
Yeah, I would say I was lucky, but I think that you've got to put yourself in those situations to get lucky. But it was lucky. So I was obviously diagnosed and then I was already involved with this racing team, was already racing with them. So I kept racing with them. There were a couple of big races that I then didn't compete in, but quite quickly I got back into, going training and figuring out if I could do it. The first thing I did was call up the team doctor and I went and had a coffee with the team doctor and I said, look, I've seen these rulings that I found online, official documents. Like, what do you think about these? What do you think about my situation? Like, can I do this stuff? Like, can I reasonably do this stuff? Because this guy the team doctor, knew a lot about ocean racing. And he said, well, funnily enough, it was me that made that ruling for that event. And I was like, oh, interesting. This is going to go one or two ways. This could be like totally the end. And he said, realistically, I made that ruling on a case by case basis. Those people weren't equipped. They wouldn't have been safe to race. We made that as a reasonable decision on a case by case basis, which obviously wasn't communicated in the press release. And he said, this is probably a couple of months after I was diagnosed. He said, you already have, what looks to be good management, plus with the technology that you have available, plus with, your sailing pedigree expertise, I suppose. He said, all being well, I see no reason why I wouldn't recommend you to be able to compete. So I was like, wow, like what more can you ask for? And it's easy to say, oh, there were these rules and I had them change the rules. And actually there were some people that really supported me. And of course, you live with a condition like type 1. People are going to tell you can't do things. Like that happens. It happens all the time to us. But I was lucky in that I do feel like there were a lot of people that were very supportive. And I wonder if that's a two-way thing. If you present it in a way that's reasonable and rational and also positive, then I think people respond well to that too.
You were motivated to manage your diabetes very well then from the start, right? Because you really needed good management to be able to prove that you would survive on the ocean. So how is that define maybe your diabetes management?
It's huge. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to manage diabetes well. And certainly 10 years ago, it was even more work. I mean, you didn't have, some of the amazing tech that we have now. And it was starting to come in, I started on pens, injections, and finger prick tests. And quite quickly, I ended up on a CGM, and, that kind of stuff makes a huge difference. But it's a lot of work. So you got to be motivated if you want to manage well. And it's really, really hard to find motivation every single day for day-to-day life. So having something like that, this thing that I wanted to do, where it was very clear that I needed to have good management, I needed to prove that I could manage it well, was, like a massive pull for me to do the work. Every single day to show up and to do the work. And I think that for me is one of the powers of endurance sport, however big or small the challenge. No endurance challenge is too small, but if you want to go and, if you're not a runner and you want to go and run 5K, you've got to show up for yourself every day. You've got to go training. You've got to do your physio. You've got to do your nutrition. You've got to, like, at whatever level. So doing these endurance challenges, challenging yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, whatever it is, it's so much more than just like the result. It's about showing up for yourself every day and then learning that you can do that, and the power of that. And then once you've learned that you can do that, it's much easier to then apply yourself and do that again.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing you say, because diabetes management is hard enough as it is on land, but solo ocean racing is one of the toughest sports out there. So both physically and mentally. So how do you manage your blood sugars when you're, let's say, sleep deprived, cold, under huge pressure? How do you do that?
That's why I usually talk about, and this is really important. I'm going to talk about two things. I usually talk about the process, because the process is important because that's how you actually do it. And for me, it's this whole idea of, the challenge is this big already. It's just a little bit more on top of the challenge. So it's kind of not something to really worry about. And it really aligns well with the challenges of the sport anyway. So certainly when you're solo ocean racing, but even with a team, you're constantly trying to battle all of these tasks that you have to do. And there's way too many things to do. Way too many things. You've got to manage, you've got to look after the boat and make sure the boat is in good shape. You've got to keep the boat moving as fast as possible in a straight line, which is a full-time job. You've got to manage your strategy and your navigation. So you're downloading weather files, looking at where your competitors are constantly. It doesn't matter how fast you are. If you go the wrong way, You go the wrong way around the racetrack, you're going to come last, right? And then you also have to manage yourself, whether that's sleep, making sure that you sleep enough, but not too much that you go slowly, but enough that you make good decisions. You got to manage your nutrition. You got to manage your fluid intake. You got to manage, your emotions. You got to manage. You can't be on all the time, or you'll burn out. You have to manage that. You have to manage the times when you need to push really hard, the times when you can relax a little bit. Different people have different thresholds for that. A lot of that comes with experience too. So for me, managing type 1 is just another thing. And because there's so many things to do, it's all about prioritizing. It's a management exercise. So what's top of my list? And there's no break from this. The breaks are in the list. So is the top of the list that I need to change a sail? Is the top of the list that I need to have a break? Is the top of the list that I need to treat this potential hypo? Obviously that goes to the top of the list. So as long as I'm always managing, as long as I'm prioritizing correctly, which is then about having good inputs. So things like sensor data and being honest with yourself, is this a problem? Do I need to address it? Do I need to address it now? The answer is yes. You've been honest with yourself, and then you go and do that. So that's the ins and outs of it. And I guess I have a little bit more perspective. I've been doing we've spoken about this before. I've been doing some triathlon recently. Did my first half Ironman distance triathlon. And a lot of the challenges are similar. A lot of them are different. The big thing with the ocean racing is the gravity of the situation. So if you get it wrong, you're 1,000 miles from land. The only people nearby are your competitors, if they can even get to you. Or, the gravity of the situation is huge relative to, even if you're on the bike course of a half Ironman, someone's going to come and get you within, whatever time period. If you have a problem, or you can find, it's still serious. Don't get me wrong. But the big difference is, I'm out here on my own. It's not even just, oh, I have to solve these problems. It's just the weight of them. And so how do you deal with that, I guess, emotionally? How do you deal with that? How do you not let that then spiral you out of control? And we all know, living with type 1, how things like stress and our emotions can then impact our management. As soon as you start worrying, it becomes even harder to control. All of that stuff is so hard. So I guess that's the bigger picture stuff. And again, that for me is about trusting in your processes. And it's also about experience. You have to build up to these things. You have to take a step at a time so you don't end up too far from what you know, so that you are massively out of your depth, and then it can just spiral out of control.
I do recognize that idea that you mentioned, that diabetes is just one of the things you have to manage. Okay, you're doing very extreme things. The closest I think I ever did that maybe in that range, but still way different, was the 10-day bike packing on my own in the mountains. So sometimes you don't have connection, you don't have coverage, internet or even phone coverage. So you're on your own in the middle of nowhere, and if something goes wrong, that may have bad consequences. That's what you're saying. But diabetes has never been my main concern, even in these events, because you need to worry more about your hydration, your food, your next stop. Is your gear okay? Are you not too fatigued to go on? Are you going to make it on time? These kind of things, as long as diabetes is going well, they have priority. And it's just one of the other things. Yeah, diabetes is just one of the other things that comes in, and you have to manage it, but you don't see it as your main challenge. It's just one of the challenges, right?
So what you're saying is they're basically the same, and you did this thing where you're comparing the two things, and you can't do that. They are basically the same. I'm not going to go and, okay, I do some cycling. I'm pretty comfortable on my bicycle. If I went and did 10 days bike packing totally on my own, I would be out of my comfort zone. That is your thing. You trained for that. My thing is ocean racing. And something I should have said earlier is, we talk about this subsection of people who are suited to what I do is relatively small. I don't ever sit here and say, I think people should do what I do. I sit here and think, how do we apply like the things that I've learned to the things that you want to do, and the things that you've learned to the things that I want to do. And that's where I'm like, they're the same. You going bike packing versus me being in the middle of the ocean, like it's all perspective, it's all individual. And I do seriously think that they're all the same.
Yeah. On the other hand, I would never, ever in my life want to be on the ocean on my own at night when there's a storm going on. Uh, but yeah, I can see where you're getting at. Yes, the principle behind that is the same. Yes, and I think you've talked about CGMs, but yeah, technology is for diabetes management in that, especially in these extreme cases, it's very important, right? How does that work for you? Are you using a pump?
I'm using a pump. Yeah, I've used a few different pumps. CGM is a big thing for me. The pump is, no, they're both really important. When I was first talked about, the first questions I had to answer when I was diagnosed were not, will people let me go sailing? They were, can I actually do it? And injecting falling off waves was just a nightmare. I tried it. It didn't work. So having the option to go on a pump meant that it was a tool available to me that meant that I could do that. It's not perfect for everyone. And I appreciate that. But for me in that situation, it meant that I could do it. So I went on a pump. And then CGM was massive in building my case to go not just sailing, not just ocean racing, but to do the solo stuff for me and also for the decision makers in terms of safety around doing these kind of races. You're on your own. You are on your own. And so relying on finger pricking at the right time, and we know how quickly these things change. Having a CGM with inbuilt alarms, nothing linked at this stage, no hybrid closed loop or anything. This is 7-8 years ago. I don't think I could go solo ocean racing without CGM. And I'm so reliant on it now. It enables me to do what I do at the level that I want to do it at, which is, again, right place, right time.
Totally agree. I used to ride my bike before CGM, so I did it without CGM, and that worked. Especially if it's like a leisurely ride, right? You can stop whenever you want. You can finger prick. But when you're in a race, or let's say you're doing bike packing, whatever, you're not stopping all the time to check to check your sugar. It's not what you do. So it becomes so much more complicated. And I think I wouldn't have dared even to get into these challenges without that data. That's been that's been crucial, I think, in enabling me to do these things. And you're basically saying the same for you.
Definitely. Yeah, it's confidence, it's safety. Safety is always, we obviously talk about that a lot in what I do. But the baseline is always, are we safe? We're pushing boundaries of things. You always got to think about safety. A lot of that's in preparation. A lot of that's in making sure that you have the right information to respond to. So type 1, it's making sure that you have like continuous glucose data. So you have the information that you need to respond to. It's so important.
How does that look like in practice for you? Because it sounds like you prepare a lot for your diabetes management during these events. So how do you plan it? Did you plan it as carefully, let's say, as your sales, your food, your route?
Yeah, less so now because I have systems in place. Definitely having redundancy is important. What's your worst nightmare? Your worst nightmare is your kit failing. Your pump fails and you don't have pens to do injections, or your insulin goes bad. That's like worst case scenario. That's serious life-threatening condition in the middle of the ocean. So the number one thing is, how do we prepare around that? How do we mitigate those risks? Risks are always there. How do we mitigate them? So having backups of everything, making sure that I protect everything, making sure I have things like different batches of insulin in case there's a batch that's bad, or making sure I store them in different parts of the boat, making sure I try and protect them from vibration or big temperature changes on the boat. There's a lot of thinking and planning that goes into that. I now have a whole raft of experience, a whole host of data points to say what works and what maybe doesn't work and how far I can push things. And a lot of that's then testing for yourself within safe bounds to then figure out what works, rather than just listening to the guidelines of, your insulin has to be in the fridge for, it can't be outside of the fridge for however many days. Well, I now know for, in a certain environment, like I've got these data points that it was fine after this long. And obviously it's not, you've then got to do the research and understand, I understand that it's not the same when it's been in 30 degrees, like ambient temperature for 5 days. Like even if it's still working, it's less efficacious, right? It's not as good. So I have to then understand that and take that into account. But that's a part of the testing. So I do a lot less preparation there now because I have the systems that work for me, which is nice because it means that I can then focus on the things that are more performance oriented, like,
That's what's
strategy.
important, right?
Yeah.
Not every participant has type 1 diabetes. It's something you have to deal with. And if you're only dealing with that, you're not dealing with the race anymore. So it's a good thing that you can, that you have enough experience to do that. But despite all that experience and all of this planning, have you ever had like a critical moment during a race where diabetes directly influenced what happened?
Uh, that's a hard question to answer. No, I haven't had any, really serious moments. Nothing where I've needed help or, really felt vulnerable. And I think that's partially because of the preparation and the way you approach it. Obviously, there are things that happen. There are things that happen like on the boat every day. We break stuff on the boat every single day. I have had hypos when I've been in the middle of the ocean at a not ideal time, but I've known how to prioritize those, and I've never felt unsafe in that regard. Or I've been with the team and making sure that the team, something I don't talk about that much is racing with a team is a whole different challenge in terms of how they then perceive you with type 1, because you don't want to be a burden to the team. You want to be a supportive member of the team, but you need them to support you at times, or at least to know that there might be a time when they need to support you. So how do you balance your own feelings of, I don't want to appear like weak, I guess. I don't want to appear to the team like, I could let them down, but those are my feelings. Those aren't the team's feelings. And it's up to the team to evaluate if like the strengths that I bring to the team outweigh, the fact that they might have to, like I might have to drop out for a couple of minutes like on occasion to treat a hypo at an inconvenient time. That's for them to decide. That's not for me to decide.
Yeah, but diabetes can give you that feeling of not wanting to let down the other people around you. Does that make you more of a perfectionist when it comes to type 1 diabetes, or are you a perfectionist? Would you say you're a perfectionist when it comes to type 1 management in general?
I wouldn't say I'm a perfectionist at all. I would say I'm very details oriented. And I'd say it's not the same thing. I like things when they're perfect. Don't get me wrong. And I like making sure the details are taken care of. I really like the details. But I'm also, it doesn't bother me when things aren't perfect because they so rarely are. And again, this is where the offshore racing is just the perfect analogy. Things are getting thrown at you left, right, and center. The perfect race is basically impossible. We're striving for it the whole time, but you also have to accept that, you can't dwell on the fact that something's happened that's not been perfect. You just have to move on and keep striving for it. And I think for me, diabetes management is the same. And if I was a perfectionist about it, then I think that the emotional toll on that for me would be massive. And I think I can get to good management without that. And it's about knowing, when to change your strategy and when to, there are times when we all go through periods of better management or worse management. Times when my management's a bit worse, where I have to be like, look, I need to spend a bit more time on this. And there are times when it's good, where I'm like, this is cool. Just don't worry about it.
Yeah, it's a great mindset, I would say. I mean, things will go wrong. You can't prevent that. There are always things that can go wrong that are not in your hands. I mean, for instance, if I'm racing and I lose one of my bidons on the track, so the bottle is gone, there's my food, my nutrition is in that bottle. So it's not about that. It's about how you deal with it, right? And how you find a way to work around that and to find a solution to that and think about that. It's also that something that comes with experience, of course. If it happens once, the next time it happens, it will not be that bad. You will know what to do immediately.
Yeah. But this is life. It's not perfect. And I'd say that's the difference for me between details. You know, the detail is in, you know, the preparation. The detail is, you know, is my bottle perfect for my bottle holder? You know, that's the
Yeah,
detail, right? You know,
that's
am I
the
going to look
technical
into that
part.
and
Yeah,
exactly and give
yeah,
myself the best chance? But then when it happens, I'm like, it's happened. It's not perfect, but it's happened. Like we'll move on.
true. So, yeah, diabetes, of course, has very important physical aspects that we all know, and you can try to plan for them. But there are also mental aspects, I think, that can play an important role. When I talk to people with type 1 diabetes, I notice that some of them see diabetes exclusively as a burden, something that troubles them. But I've listened to some of your previous interviews, and I couldn't help but notice your positive attitude towards diabetes. How has diabetes shaped you as an athlete and maybe even made you a better person?
It's kind of tricky this because I also don't want to be that person that says, you know, this is a good thing. Like you have to see it like a good thing. You know, it's been good for me. You know, it's not like that. It is hard. It does have, it can be a burden. It can be. Don't get me wrong. It can be a burden. I've managed to find this way of looking at it that feels like it's added something to my life, which it definitely has. It doesn't distract from what it's taken away. They can both coexist. So certainly with ocean racing and with solo ocean racing, it's a big management exercise. The best thing you can do in terms of performance is manage yourself well so that you make the right decisions, so that you can keep pushing, you know, day in, day out for long periods of time, but without taking your foot off the gas too much. And a big part of that is knowing what you need and when you need it. So being diagnosed with type 1 has definitely given me an edge with that. It's taught me because you just have no choice. You have to listen to yourself. You have to know what you need and when you need it. You've got this thing with this, you know, it's not just, oh, I'm going to get a bit hungry because I haven't eaten enough and that's annoying. It's like, if I don't get this right, the consequences are serious. So you have to. So that's given me something that's made me a better sailor. It's made me a better athlete. It has also, you know, shaped my focus in a way. It's given me a little bit of purpose in a way. But, you know, there's all this other stuff as well that it takes away from you. It makes it harder. So I'm not going to sit here and be like, I love a positive attitude. I think it's massively powerful. It works for me. But it doesn't mean you have to ignore the negative stuff. It's still there. You can still acknowledge it.
No, I agree. There are things that I can say that diabetes has done for me that made me a better person. For instance, I don't think I would be so health conscious and aware of my own body if it weren't for diabetes. I don't think I would have gone so far in my sports and in triathlon if it weren't for diabetes. This was a motivation for me to do more with, the body that I've been given. You can't do anything about diabetes. Is terrible when it happens to you, but once you have it, you better learn how to live with it in a way that works for you.
That's it. You can't change it. You know, we're not at the moment. You can't change it, but you can change how you see it. And that's not, you know, like I said, that's not ignoring the negative side, but it's trying to find, you know, what has it given me that I didn't have before? Is it that it's given me resilience? Is it that it's taught me to overcome challenges? And if you can't find them, then, you know, look harder or know that they're coming. You know, you can go through really hard times with something like this, and they are really hard, and it can be really difficult to find any positives, or there may not be any. But it doesn't mean that they're not coming or that you can't find them. And that just, you know, for me, that guess just helps me to accept it, helps me to live with it, which is, I think, really, really, really important.
You described diabetes before even as a sort of superpower. Is that the resilience, maybe the discipline that it has given you, that superpower?
Yeah, I think so. I mean it more literally in the sense that it, you know, it has taught me to be more tuned into what I need, which in the racing that I do is a superpower. Like that's the number one thing. If I was to pick one thing to be good at to make me fast on my boat across an ocean, that's what it is. And it has given me that. So it's definitely a superpower. And I found that and I appreciate that. And You know, it's like the obvious question is, well, if you could go back and change it, would you change it? Well, no, no, I wouldn't change it. I would love to not have it. Don't get me wrong. I'd love to not have to worry about it. But where I am now, I have things that I'm proud of. It's a part of me now. I've lived with it for 10 years. And so, no, I wouldn't change it. I would love to just not have it tomorrow. That's a different question.
Yes, the same for me.
Mm,
Only the thing is, the moment a cure would be available, I would be like, give it to other people first who need it
mm,
more. That would
yeah,
be my philosophy there. I would love to not have diabetes, but I think there are other people who need it more, the cure,
totally
than
agree.
I do.
And I recognize that as well. For me, I feel like and this could be a function of a number of different things, but I feel like I've had a relatively easy ride of it. I have good management. I've been able to do the things I want to do. Maybe I'm lucky that the way my brain works suits day-to-day management, or I've found these ways that work for me. But, also physiologically, there's a good chance that like it's easier for me than it is for some people. And there's a lot more research into how type 1 impacts different people. Like everyone's diabetes is different. So I do feel very lucky from that regard. And I think it's important to recognize that it's definitely harder for some people.
You say it's been an easy ride, but in a way, the way that you described it, you put a huge amount of effort into managing your diabetes and finding a way that works for you. So yeah, I mean, like you say, maybe it takes a certain type of person to be able to do that, but it's it's hard work. Diabetes is hard work.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's not an easy ride would be unfair. I think it's not. I think it's more just recognizing that it's different for everyone. I think that's the really important thing to recognize. And we see that in treatment and in care. And I think the number one thing that has to happen is recognizing that it is different for everyone and everyone's experience of it is different as well. And so, when we are talking, for example, okay, we've been talking more about me than about you, but there's stuff that we can learn from each other. And it doesn't mean that like one person's experience are more valid than the others, but there's always stuff that we can learn from other people's experiences. No one's telling you, and no one should be telling you if you see someone saying something on Instagram or social media. And I feel quite strongly about this, like it's not gospel. You can't take it as fact. You can infer some lessons that might work for you, and you can take something from maybe their experiences, but it's never, this is what you have to do. You got to figure it out for yourself. It's a very individual condition. I think it's still one of the like very few conditions that you can live with in the age today, where you make your own potentially life-threatening dosing decisions every day. So you got to figure it
True.
out.
Yes.
And you can have support. Don't get me wrong. There's lots of support, and support is important. But at the end of the day, it is an individual thing.
One of the positive things about diabetes, like you basically said, is it can also connect people, right? So sharing the same condition can bring people together. You are like breaking barriers as one of the first people with type 1 aspiring to attempt this legendary Vendée Globe ocean race. So I'm wondering, what does that representation mean to you, like with the diabetes community?
It definitely feels like a privilege. Definitely feels like an opportunity to have found some more purpose to it myself. Obviously, it's something that I'm passionate about. It's something that I would want to do anyway. It's an endurance challenge. It's professional sport. It is, I'll be perfectly honest about this. It is primarily selfish. I want to do it for me. I want to do it because I want to do it. But there's this whole other thing now where, if in doing that, I can, spread awareness, have an impact on other people. We were talking earlier about the importance of recognizing the symptoms of undiagnosed diabetes, type 1 and type 2, all the other types. If I can help to spread some awareness about that, and even the smallest way, then that's feels like a privilege. So definitely there's that global outlook, but there's also, I guess, this opportunity to, to connect with other people. And I certainly, when I was first diagnosed, I wasn't very, I'm comfortable with my own company, right? Clearly.
Well, you have to be if you're,
Yeah.
for days on end on your own in the middle of the
Mm.
ocean, right?
Yeah. So I wasn't very good at, engaging in the community maybe. And I do a lot more of that now. It still doesn't come entirely naturally to me. But I see the value in it as well. Even just said I started doing a bit of triathlon, and there've been a few kind of type 1 triathlon cycling, running, swimming groups that I've joined, or I've spoken to people like yourself, and I've learned things that I didn't know that have massively fast tracked my experience. How do you manage your insulin on the bike? How do you know, like, how to set your basal rate? Like, are you trying to set your basal rate to avoid hypo? And then how do you manage to keep yourself in range? And then how do you manage your nutrition around that? Or is it that which clearly is the answer, but it took me, it took someone telling me to figure this out. You manage your nutrition for what you need, manage your nutrition as if you don't have type 1, and then try and match your insulin requirements for your level of exertion and the nutrition that you need, right? Just stuff like that. I wouldn't have got there on my own. So the power of the community in terms of just knowledge and information, and then what you get from that is you meet these amazing people and you feel this connection, and you feel this, I guess, this sense of we are in this together, even though it's so individual. We are in this together. And again, there's something I get with the ocean racing. And maybe we kind of talked about this at the beginning. I'm a super competitive person. I really like winning. I'm okay with losing. You go and do these races, and even though you're on your own, or on your, with a team, you're still isolated, your own team in the middle of the ocean. You've got all these competitors doing the same thing, and you really feel this sense of, you also get it. Yeah, I think you get this in any endurance event. You get this sense of like, we've all been through this together. We've all achieved this together. And so it kind of like, it's a really nice bonding thing that brings you all together. And I think there's a lot of value in that. There's a lot of reward in that. We are, even people like me who like spending time on their own, we are social beings, right?
Completely. Yeah, I completely agree, because I learned how to cycle properly in a type 1 team that just used to go on cycling challenges together, and we would all train to be ready for a big ride in the mountains at the end of the year, and we would just be part of the same team, and we do that together. I learned so much just from riding with these people, talking to them, learning from their experience. And yeah, like you say, it can fast track your own diabetes management, because you can see what works for other people, and then you can try things out, but you need to be aware to even, be able to do that. I think it's so powerful to connect with other type 1 diabetics, and just train and do exercise together and learn together in that way. Now that you're so experienced, of course, you have more to share, I would say, than a beginner. But on the other hand, I'm so grateful that there were experienced people who were willing to spend their time teaching me about, what works for them, and to share their experience with me. So I'm happy to return the favor now. I mean, that's how I look at it.
You can learn from everyone. Everyone can learn from everyone. And this is what I mean when I say, I'm never telling anyone what to do. I'm sharing the experiences that I have. And if someone can take something from that, that's great. And I have some experiences now to share. But equally, someone with less experiences is no less valid. They still have something that I can learn from. And that's a mindset thing for sure. But yeah, the single biggest thing I think then is this sense of community. So that's what it gives you. And that's what I realized by engaging in it more. It gives you the sense of community, which does one thing, and it makes you feel less alone. It makes you feel less like it's just you against type 1 in a condition where it can often feel like that by nature, by definition. So feeling like, we are all in this together, I think is so powerful.
So building on that, what message do you hope your journey sends to, let's say, a young boy or girl with type 1 who dreams of doing big, ambitious things?
Yeah, you got to dream them first. I'm a big advocate for having the dreams, and then it's about, what are the realistic steps to get there? Keep pushing yourself, however small those challenges are, which is this whole idea of it is all the same. And the stuff you learn from one challenge will take you to the next challenge. And if you learn, you got to have the dream, but you've got to then learn to enjoy that process of challenging yourself on a daily basis. And what can I learn on a daily basis? Not necessarily every day. You can have your days off. And if you keep doing that, you suddenly find yourself in a place where you look back and you're like, oh, wow, I did that. And I think that's it's as simple as that for me. And it's cliche, you know, enjoy the process. Have the dream, enjoy it. Like, it's cliche, but it's so true. And then I guess the more, you know, more type 1 or just diabetes specific would be, yeah, make sure you have those days off, you know, apply yourself to those challenges, but don't be too hard on yourself. I've certainly learned, I guess the thing that I've learned by managing in these extreme situations where you've got so much on is, like, I've learned these processes which tell me how to go about managing it, but I've also learned at certain times, like, how much I can do whilst also managing it. And, you know, the fact that it can take up a relatively small part of my brain and I can still be safe and I can still be managing well. So then like transpose that into real life where it's not the same. I'm not motivated in the same way to manage every day, and I couldn't be, because it's every single day and it's endless. So I don't want to be trying to work hard on it every single day, or it would just be too much. But I've learned that, you know, at certain times when it's going well, it can just be this small little thing over here, as long as I know how to recognize when it needs to be more than that. And yeah, that's huge for me. Huge.
So that's maybe also how you manage to stay sane in a way, because having that level of diabetes management all the time, your entire life, every day, is impossible. So what you're basically saying is, when you're doing an event, you're hyper focused, you plan for everything, you're on top of your diabetes management, completely on top. But also, you know, when it comes to day-to-day life, don't be afraid to let go a little bit. And you don't have to be that laser focused, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. You got to enjoy. There's other things I enjoy doing. You kind of alluded to this earlier, and other people you've spoken to have seemed quite relaxed about their management. And yeah, I think that's really important. It's how do you be more relaxed about it without compromising it? And I think what's really interesting is, like, when I'm in a good place, my management, when I'm more relaxed day to day, is only like a couple of points. You know, it's only a little bit, I don't want to say worse, because there's so many other things at play, but it's only a little bit less refined than when I'm like hyper focused on it when I'm racing. The difference isn't that much. Okay, there's times when it's not so good, and then you do have to work on it. But if you can have those moments where you recognize it's still pretty good, and you can be more relaxed and you can enjoy other things, then that for me is what gets you through. It's really important. That means that you can enjoy living your life, right?
So that diabetes management can get a little bit smaller, right? In day-to-day life, because, like you say, you have other things in your life to focus on. You want to be able to focus on them too. They deserve your attention. So if you're so focused all the time on your diabetes management, it can really take away attention from things that are important in life. So yeah, I think that's a very, very nice message to send. So, Jack, as much as I enjoy listening to your very inspirational story, I would like to end our chat with a bit of fun. So I have a few rapid fire questions for you to answer, if you're okay with that.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Here goes. What's your go-to hyper rescue snack on board?
Jelly babies. It's a sweet that we have in the UK. I don't know if you have them. They're excellent. It's what I always use. I like them, but they're small, and I know exactly how many I need. They're great.
Great.
But also, my girlfriend really likes them, so she does eat some of them.
So, what's your favorite stretch of ocean to sail?
I really like the North Atlantic. It is incredibly challenging, incredibly varied. I spent a lot of time out there. Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
Which is worse, hypo or hyper?
Oh, they're both bad.
Yeah.
I mean, hypo for sure. I hate being hyper. I feel rubbish. It's horrible, but hypo is dangerous in the short term. So definitely worse.
True enough. What's your favorite insulin pump site?
Mm, I quite like the back of my arm. I don't do it very often. It's a bit more vulnerable on the boat, but it works really well for me. So it's not a go-to, but I do really like it.
Music, podcasts, or silence when you're offshore?
Music, but only when I can, which isn't very often. I love music. I love listening to music. I love making music. But a lot of the time, you have to be listening to the creaks and groans of the boat to try and understand what's going on. So very rarely.
What type of music do you listen to then?
I listen to a whole range. I really like blues. I listen to a lot of blues at the moment.
Blues. Interesting. And have you ever used your diabetes as an excuse?
Almost certainly. I couldn't tell you when. Almost certainly. I mean, it takes so much away. You have to get something from it, right?
Yeah. And the last question, what's the hardest part of living with type 1 diabetes that most people don't realize?
It's relentless. Yeah. Yeah. I think people see the day to day of it, and especially nowadays with the technology that we have, and they think, oh, it doesn't look like a huge burden. It doesn't look like that much to deal with. And they often see it when it's going well and not when it's going badly. But the real burden of it is the fact that it's there tomorrow, it's there the day after. There is no end in sight. I see this a lot like endurance sport, racing across an ocean, even if it's just a few day race, when it gets really hard, the finish line is too far away to be your motivation. So you have to find other ways to get through the days. The same when you're doing an endurance cycling event or something, when it's really painful, the finish line just feels too far away. And so suddenly then the finish line isn't a thing, which is the same with diabetes. There is no finish line. So you have to find other ways to keep making sure you put one foot in front of the other, to keep making sure you think about, what's the next thing that I need to do, and to get through those small steps and to find the small wins.
Yeah, there are no rest days for diabetes.
Nope.
Doesn't happen. You can't
Nope.
switch
So
it
what
off.
are the small wins? Like, what's the small thing that you can focus on that is your next finish line?
Wow. Yeah, that's a great note to end with. You did well. So how was this conversation for you?
Yeah, it's been great. It's been great to talk to you. I think someone who's also a fellow endurance athlete, it's so nice to talk about some of the specifics of that. And I really hope that there are some people out there that will be listening who can take something from these experiences. And if anyone ever wants to reach out to me as well, then with pleasure, take questions, and always happy for a conversation in the chat.
Yeah. Where can they find you on social media?
The best place is probably Instagram, Trigger Sailing, @Trigger Sailing on Instagram. If I don't reply straight away, it's probably because I'm at sea.
Yes, that's very understandable. And what is the next big milestone in your racing journey now on the calendar?
I've got some more racing happening this year. I racing with a couple of teams this year, but always focused on putting together this project. It's a whole project to compete in the Vendée Globe, to race around the world. We keep chasing after that goal. That's what motivates me. And I'm enjoying the process and trying to get to the next step. It's about bringing the right people together, bringing the right fundraising together, making sure we've got the right boat, and then going and racing. So stay tuned.
Yeah, I wish you all the best with that. And it's been incredible, Jack, to hear about your journey from your first days of sailing as a child to your ambitions of racing around the world as the first type 1. And that all, while living with type 1 diabetes, which is already, I would say, a big challenge. I must say, your determination and your mindset are incredibly inspiring. So again, I wish you all the best in your career as an athlete. And thank you so much for making the time to be here today.
Thank you, David. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Out of Range, the podcast that shares real stories from athletes living and thriving with type 1 diabetes. I hope today's conversation inspired you to get active, take control, and find your own balance in sport and in life. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and follow the show, or share it with someone who might benefit from hearing these stories. Every recommendation helps more people with type 1 diabetes discover the power of movement. And in the meanwhile, keep learning, keep moving, and keep your glucose in range.